Good afternoon. My name is Elizabeth Beiser, and I am the Secretary of the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. I first want to take a moment to thank NC State for hosting us on this beautiful fall afternoon. I also want to welcome Governor Roy Cooper, Congresswoman Deborah Ross, and EPA Administrator Michael Regan. And thank you to all of you for being with us today as well. Administrator Regan, we are honored to have you back home here in North Carolina. As my predecessor at the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality, Administrator Regan understands how important our natural resources are to the people and the economy of our great state. For everyone here, protecting these resources and the health of North Carolinians is our life's work. 4 years ago, researchers at this university made the discovery of the presence of a chemical known as Gen X in the Cape Fear River. Since then, North Carolina has been at the forefront of the battle against a class of chemicals known as PFAS, in collaboration with world-class researchers, state regulators, and our residents who have been affected. Under Governor Cooper's leadership, DEQ, under then Secretary Regan, took decisive action to stop Chemours from releasing Gen X into the air and water, dealing with the source of the contamination. Well testing and alternate water supplies for the residents impacted by the contamination immediately followed, and the long process of cleaning up the residual contamination began and is still ongoing. North Carolina continues to use its resources and its authority to hold the polluters accountable. But what we know now is that the issue of emerging chemicals is bigger than one compound or one facility. Every day we learn more about these compounds, their prevalence and their persistence in our environment. And North Carolina is not alone. Other states are discovering PFAS from firefighting foam, from industrial sources, and from consumer products in their drinking water wells and drinking water supplies. And that's why coordination between state and federal partners is critical in addressing PFAS in a way that protects all of our communities. We all understand that we have to address this challenge with comprehensive policy and regulatory approaches to ensure that each of our actions, short-term and long-term, state and federal, are part of a larger strategy that is protective of our residents, their health, and our natural resources. I count us lucky to have great partners in all of you at the local and the state level. And at the federal level, we are grateful for the leadership of North Carolinians like Congresswoman Deborah Ross. She was no stranger. She was no stranger to environmental issues when she served in the General Assembly. In her first term in Congress, her work on the 2021 PFAS Action Plan, she has established herself as a national leader on emerging compounds. It is my pleasure to introduce my friend, Congresswoman Deborah Ross.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for including me for this very, very important announcement. It's a privilege to be here at NC State, home to researchers and scientists who have dedicated their time and expertise to assessing PFAS, assessing their exposure, their bioaccumulation, and remediation. And they have exposed the harmful health effects that can result from the exposure to these forever chemicals. I also want to begin by thanking Administrator Regan for his work both at the Environmental Protection Agency and at the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality to address PFAS contamination. As you all know, PFAS compounds, forever chemicals, have contaminated our water, soil, and air for decades. The CDC estimates that almost every American has been exposed to them, especially our brave firefighters, our service members, and their families. And North Carolina knows this issue too well. Chemical companies have polluted the Cape Fear River with PFAS for years. Tests of drinking water systems in my district, including Raleigh and Cary, have detected PFAS. Fortunately, we've been able to work to tackle this issue in Congress in a bipartisan way. The health and safety of North Carolinians and Americans should never be a partisan issue. I'm a member of the Congressional PFAS Task Force, a group of at least 60 members, including Democrats and Republicans, who are working to urgently address the public health threat that PFAS shows to our communities. My colleagues across the aisle, in particular Congressman Hudson and Congressman Rouser, have joined me in leading the effort to protect North Carolinians and support our utilities' efforts to get PFAS out of drinking water. In July, the House of Representatives passed the PFAS Action Act with bipartisan support. This comprehensive bill, if enacted into law, would accomplish a number of goals, including authorizing grants to drinking water utilities treating PFAS contamination, and taking major steps toward holding industry accountable for PFAS pollution. Some utilities, including some here in North Carolina, are already investing millions of dollars to upgrade their water treatment technology. I was proud to offer a bipartisan amendment with Congressman Rouser to clarify the requirements for this grant program, helping to ensure that communities that are already investing money to address this problem can still benefit from future federal funding. The PFAS Action Plan is a strong step forward to protect our health, our water, our air, our soil, and our people. But the work can't stop there. Earlier this year, I led a letter with Congressman Hudson in support of requiring Comores to fund robust health and environmental testing for 54 PFAS chemicals being manufactured here in North Carolina. The communities surrounding this facility have the right to know the health risks associated with these manufacturing activities, and many of these are military communities. Industry has known of the dangers of PFAS contamination for decades, yet we still lack significant federal protections. We cannot continue to let man-made chemicals endanger the health of our communities. Fortunately, we have a powerful ally in the Environmental Protection Agency, and President Biden picked the right person for the job in Administrator Regan. His experience at NCDEQ set a strong example for other states around the country trying to address their own PFAS contamination. Now at the EPA, he and his staff are working tirelessly to tackle this problem. Administrator Regan has heard our concerns and the concerns lifted by communities in North Carolina and around the country. He recognizes that we have a duty at the federal level to protect health and safety of our firefighters, our service members, our communities, and the environment. We now have the people in place to make a difference and take this problem seriously at a national level. Today's announcement of EPA's PFAS roadmap is one of the most significant steps to date that the federal government has taken to protect our communities from these chemicals. I'll let Administrator Regan share details of the roadmap, but I'm confident that it will move us down the right path to fix our environment and protect our people. Thank you, Administrator Regan, for the great work you're doing, and so quickly. And thank you to Secretary Beiser and Governor Cooper for taking this issue seriously, for all the work you're doing at the state level to protect North Carolinians and to protect our environment. And now you'll hear from our governor.
Look around. What a day. It's up to us. It's up to us to preserve it. It's up to us to protect it. Clean air, clean water are a right. We owe it to our children. We owe it to our children's children. And as a state, North Carolina is going to put that at the forefront. It's great to be with all of you today, and we are so happy to have EPA Administrator Michael Regan back home. He didn't tell you guys in Washington it was State Fair Week, did he? You'd probably find him over there. Secretary Elizabeth Beiser, thank you for your leadership. Congresswoman Ross, thank you for yours. And Democratic House Leader Reeves is here with a number of legislators, local government officials, and a number of people that I see who have put North Carolina's environment at the top of their agenda for decades. I'm grateful that you're here. The team that we put together in North Carolina continues to help our nation. Michael's strong performance when he was DEQ Secretary here led to his appointment and confirmation as EPA Administrator. When he was here, we began 3 years ago working together to lay the groundwork and assembling support for the historic bipartisan clean energy bill that I signed into law last week. It requires the North Carolina Utilities Commission to reduce power sector carbon emissions by 70% by 2030 and to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. There are just 15 other states that have put this type of carbon reduction requirement into law, and we joined Virginia as the only states in the Southeast. North Carolina is a leader in clean energy, and we're going to be joining Michael and other federal authorities to reduce carbon across the country. But even as we move into a clean energy economy, North Carolina communities have dealt with the presence of toxic PFAS chemicals for years. As a result, then North Carolina DEQ Secretary Regan and I made progress to hold polluters accountable and to improve the safety of our drinking water. In fact, North Carolina has become a leader in pushing to curb PFAS emissions and setting important preliminary standards. All along, we've been asking for the EPA's help, which never, ever came during the previous administration. We needed more action and more support from Washington, but found ourselves disappointed time after time until now. Now it's here. Michael Regan knew firsthand how these chemicals hurt North Carolina's drinking water and our health. So now the Biden-Harris administration and the EPA are here to answer that call. In April, Administrator Regan established the EPA Council on PFAS, putting a focus on the work that must be done to address these dangerous chemicals. The strategic roadmap that he unveils today lays out a plan to invest more in research, to take action to restrict the release of PFAS, and the fast track toward their cleanup. This roadmap commits the EPA to quickly setting enforceable drinking water limits for these chemicals, as well as giving us stronger tools and giving them to communities to protect people's health and our environment. As we continue partnering with the EPA on this and other important efforts, it's critical that Congress pass the bipartisan infrastructure deal and the larger budget resolution that includes funding to tackle PFAS contamination. In order to fully address this problem, EPA must have the resources that it needs. We cannot afford to wait. And today, let's not wait any longer to hear from the EPA directly. It is my distinct privilege to introduce a proud son of North Carolina and my friend, EPA Administrator Michael Regan.
Well, thank you, Governor Cooper, for those kind words. You know, I am so proud of the work that I did with Governor Cooper, and I'm so proud of his leadership. North Carolina is in great hands. Secretary Beiser, I couldn't be any prouder to see you in that seat. I know North Carolina is in good hands, and I'll warn you, it's a workout keeping up with our governor. Congresswoman Ross, thank you for being here. Thank you for welcoming us to your district. And thank you for your leadership, not only on PFAS, but on all environmental issues. We greatly appreciate your support. Leader Reeves, thank you so much for the continued leadership here in the state of North Carolina. And all of the elected officials, we're so glad to have you all. You know, I also want to recognize EPA's Office of Research and Development, who has contributed so much to our continuing efforts to learn as much as we can about PFAS contaminants and taking on this complex challenge. But before I get started today, I would like to take a moment to recognize the loss of a true American hero, General Colin Powell. His contributions to this country are immeasurable. Our thoughts and prayers are with his family. You know, it's great to be here in North Carolina. There's no place like North Carolina. The people are kind, they look out for one another, and they care deeply about the well-being of their communities. So when Governor Cooper appointed me as Secretary of DEQ in 2017, well, I thought I hit the jackpot. During the interview, the governor says, "Michael, what are we going to tell people who think you're too young for the job?" I paused and I said, "Governor, I promise you I'll work on that every single day." And the governor and I never looked back. The opportunity to work every day on behalf of the people of North Carolina was a tremendous honor and responsibility, as Secretary Beiser knows. But almost immediately, I was confronted with the most complex pollution challenge that I'd faced as Secretary. We had all given great thought to how to combat the impacts of climate change. We thought long and hard about how we deal with environmental justice. We even had a plan for dealing with coal ash. But Gen X was a startling discovery. A North Carolina State engineer professor and students were conducting sampling in the Cape Fear River just 50 miles from where we are standing today. They discovered the presence of a compound, Gen X, a pollutant that had been linked to a variety of health effects, including thyroid and liver issues, decreased infant birth weights, and even certain types of cancer. Not only is our Cape Fear River a state treasure, but it provides drinking water to over 1.5 million residents, many who are people of color and low income. PFAS chemicals were once considered a silver bullet when they were developed in the 1940s. Ironically, a means for making our lives easier. They were used all across America, from nonstick cookware to grease-resistant food packaging, stain and water-resistant fabrics, and cleaning products. These unregulated chemical compounds quickly became prominent in our everyday lives, propelled by the promise of a better life made easier supposedly by technology. The discovery that was made by the North Carolina State professor and his students, subsequent investigations by the Department of Environmental Quality would uncover the truth about these toxic chemical compounds in short order and identify the culprit. It didn't take long to determine that all roads led to Chemours, a chemical manufacturing company in Fayetteville. It turned out that Comores have been polluting our air and our water with these chemicals since the 1970s. They knew they were putting these chemicals into our environment, and yet they remained silent while the profits went up. All the time, there had been no one keeping Comores accountable, keeping them in check, or preventing them from indiscriminately dumping chemicals into our environment. As Secretary, I knew this kind of challenge would require state and federal leadership. But in North Carolina, we were hindered by a General Assembly that has significantly weakened DEQ, budget cut after budget cut. And at the federal level, an administration that was more concerned about undoing environmental laws than protecting the people. So in North Carolina, under the governor's leadership, we stepped it up. We immediately revoked Comores' discharge permit and followed the science and followed the law and put a bold consent order in place to hold that company accountable. That consent order resulted in the largest fine against a corporate polluter in North Carolina's history. More importantly, it required Comores to pay for and execute a cleanup plan and protect public drinking water sources for people throughout the Cape Fear River watershed. But that consent order could not undo the damage that had already been inflicted upon these communities. It could not eliminate the lingering questions people had about whether PFAS was the reason that their loved ones developed cancer. It could not completely ease a mother's angst about the years of bathing her child in contaminated water. As a parent, I wish we could have accomplished all of those things. But what this consent order did accomplish was it set down a marker. It put polluters on notice, not just here in North Carolina, but across the country, from Litchfield, New Hampshire to Security, Colorado. Today, I may have a different title, but what I want the American people to know is that I am just as committed, I am just as laser focused, and I am just as prepared to do what it takes to hold polluters accountable. I think we've all about had enough. Enough is enough. It's time that we prioritize the American people's health over profits of big polluters. I want to go as far and as fast as we can to keep our families safe from these toxic chemicals. Today, because of the researchers at North Carolina State, the scientists at EPA, advocacy organizations, so many individuals in communities that depend on drinking water from the Cape Fear River, we've expanded our understanding of PFAS now more than we've ever known before. That's why when I stepped into the role as EPA Administrator, one of my first actions was establishing the PFAS Council. Despite the previous administration's stance on anti-science, which severely strained EPA's financial and human capital, I charged this new council with undertaking a comprehensive review of the problem and identifying solutions that we could implement right now. So today I am proud to stand before you to announce the results of the council's work and to put into motion EPA's comprehensive national strategy to confront this pervasive challenge. First, we're announcing a national testing strategy that forces PFAS manufacturers from Comores to 3M to disclose in great detail just how toxic these chemicals are. It would take EPA decades to do this on our own at the expense of American families and the American taxpayer, but instead, the polluters who are poisoning our nation's waterways will be responsible for conducting and paying for this work. This strategy outlines how we'll be addressing PFAS chemicals in groups or categories, not on an individual basis, saving precious time and resources. The data and information we receive is what EPA needs to unlock our regulatory arsenal for many PFAS chemicals and to hold these polluters accountable for the harm that they've caused. I expect the first mandatory orders to be sent to industry within a matter of a couple of months, and I'm certain that among the very first PFAS we require testing on will be some that have polluted the environment right here in North Carolina. Second, EPA will establish national drinking water regulations for PFAS chemicals under the Safe Drinking Water Act. And we're also moving to designate certain PFAS as hazardous substances under EPA's Superfund law. For years, the Superfund program has successfully protected American communities by requiring polluters to pay to clean up the hazardous waste and pollution that they themselves have released in our environment. This strategy will leverage EPA's existing authority to take bold action to restrict chemicals from entering the land, the air, the water, and land at all levels that are harmful to public health and the environment. My experience at both the state and federal level has made it clear that we need to strengthen government's legal authority to protect the public as they deserve. Third, we will immediately broaden and accelerate the cleanup of PFAS contamination that we now know of today. When EPA becomes aware of a situation where PFAS poses a serious threat to the health of a community, we will not hesitate to take swift action, strong enforcement to address the threat and hold polluters accountable all across the country. Where we find contamination, we will seek necessary monitoring and cleanup from the polluters. This strategy is guided by President Biden's whole of government approach, which means EPA will work very closely with all of our federal partners, from Health and Human Services to the Department of Defense, to identify facilities where PFAS have been used and are known to be a source of contamination. In partnership with DoD, we will conduct research into testing and control technologies that will support federal agencies and communities in their efforts to address contamination. There are also a number of other actions we'll take. Among one is including a final toxicity assessment in the coming days for Gen X, which will ensure that no other community has to go through what the Cape Fear River communities had to endure. Each of these actions on their own are important, but the cumulative impact is far greater than the sum of its parts. This is a strategic alignment and an acceleration of EPA's research, regulation, and enforcement that finally addresses the full life cycle of these chemicals. Despite the depleted resources and overstretched staff at EPA, this year, my team has done more in 8 months to address this issue than the previous administration did in 48 months. And let me be clear, these actions, they're critical, but they're not enough. And that's why I'm grateful for my colleagues in Congress for developing much needed bipartisan legislation to confront this problem head on. And I respect and appreciate all of the voices of the citizen activists and the nonprofits who are calling for faster and more aggressive action. President Biden has called for more than $10 billion in funding to help address PFAS contamination through his Build Back Better agenda. These critical resources will enable EPA and other federal agencies to scale up the research and work so that they're commensurate with the scale of the challenges that we all face together. State regulators, well, throughout this country, on both sides of the aisle, they're stepping up as well. Here in North Carolina, Secretary Bizer just issued a $300,000 fine to Chemours for failing to meet its obligation to protect the people of North Carolina. Secretary Bizer is setting the standard. This is the kind of accountability that we want to see all over the country and that we will work with states to achieve. When I look across the country and I see the challenges communities are facing with PFAS, I know that there are lessons that others have learned, that we have learned, that we can share with each other. Every level of government, from local to state to tribal to federal, will need to exercise increased and sustained leadership to ensure we protect the American people. We also need the continued partnership of our advocacy group and our community activists. They play such an important role. They made us listen. I've heard you. We've learned from you, and we're learning from your experiences. You all have inspired me to never give up and to keep pushing that envelope. I know many will ask, well, why should we trust EPA right now? So many communities have been let down before, time and time again. You're tired of us sounding the alarm. You're tired of worrying. You're tired of feeling like no one's listening. One thing that I've learned throughout my career is trust must be earned. I know that you need to see action, and I believe that the national strategy that we're laying out shows and demonstrates strong and forceful action from EPA, a willingness to use all of our authorities, all of our tools, all of our talent to tackle PFAS. We have a long way to go, but we are going to get this right together. Not with empty rhetoric, but with real solutions and a pledge to hold the polluters accountable for the decades of unchecked devastation that they've caused. I'm committing to you all today that everything EPA does, from addressing PFAS to advancing environmental justice, will be done, and will be done putting people first. You will never have to wonder what EPA is about. We are about you. We are about your families. We are about your children. We are about your neighborhoods and your communities, and we will fight for you every single day. Thank you.
Thank you, Administrator Regan, Governor Cooper, and Congresswoman Ross. Administrator Regan, we appreciate your partnership and your leadership on these issues. We are excited about the roadmap, and we look forward to the work ahead with you. We all have a lot of work ahead, but with coordination at all levels of government, with our elected officials and our public servants, we can protect the communities and the residents throughout North Carolina and across the nation. Thank you all for joining us here today.